This is the Oakwyn Podcast, featuring Morgan Browne and Michael Yu.
Welcome to the Oakwyn Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Yu.
I am Morgan Browne.
And I'm the Podfather.
And we have a very special guest today,
We
Morgan.
always have a very special, but this is a next level special guest, Joe Lloyd.
Joe Lloyd.
Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, Joe Lloyd is the managing broker of our North Vancouver office at Oakwyn. So welcome, Joe. Thanks for coming to the pod.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, how long have you lived in North Vancouver in the North Shore for?
All my life.
Oh, really?
Do you want the number?
Yeah.
How
many decades?
How long have you been working as a realtor in North Vancouver?
Yeah.
Do you want that number
I
too?
want that
Yeah,
number.
sure. Yeah.
45 years in July.
Oh
Isn't
my
that
gosh.
amazing?
45 years in the business.
I feel like I need to bow down to you and be like, "You're the best."
Wait, what's your V number?
My V number is 1934.
19.
Yeah,
Wow.
but there's people that have lower V
Yeah,
numbers
like Brian
than me.
McLean.
Yeah, Brian does, but there's other people that have lower V numbers that have not been in the business as long as I have. So when they converted over to these V numbers, I'm not sure exactly how they did it, but
Right.
there's not too many people past 45.
So tell us about the start of the business when you first got started 45 years ago. Like, what was it like for you? Like, why did you decide to join to get into real estate?
Well, actually, I had planned on going into commercial real estate.
Okay.
But I had never sold anything. So I thought, I'll try residential and learn how to sell. And of course, once I got into it, I had friends that had gone into commercial when we graduated from school.
Right.
Sort of the approach was that you'd go into either commercial real estate or some kind of banking system. I graduated in finance and urban land.
Oh, okay. At UBC?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And anyway, to make a long story short, you get used to a paycheck because things happen quicker in residential than they do in commercial. And I never left it. I've dabbled in commercial, but I haven't done much in as a career in commercial.
What inspired you to even go to school for real estate, Joe? Like, did you always know?
Well, I didn't go to school for real estate. I wasn't sure what I was going to be. In fact, I started out wanting to be a teacher.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then I soon realized that when I did my first practicum in a school that was dangerous. So I thought I better not become a teacher. No, I was going to be a phys ed teacher.
Oh, okay.
Was my when I was starting out to be. And then I soon phys ed and I think they called it economics. And once I realized that I was taking all the commerce courses, I just transferred into commerce.
Yeah,
That's great.
And you're kind of you're a
like,
teacher
you are
now.
a
You are a
teacher.
teacher now, doing a manager.
Educator.
So how long did you? How long were you practicing and you still practice? Some resident, you still sell,
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah, I've ever since I became a managing broker.
Right.
One of the conditions of becoming a managing broker was the ability to sell. I did not want to be a managing broker unless I could sell.
Right.
And of course, you hear people go, "Oh, you've got a managing broker that sells. He's competing with you." Well, the other side of that is if you got a managing broker that sells, he's current in the market.
Yeah.
And I think that's much more important than worrying about a managing broker that competes with you.
Right. And how often, 45 years, and how many years as a managing broker, Joe?
I've probably been on and off for the last 30.
Yeah, 30 years as a managing broker. How often have you competed with a colleague in your office, for example?
No, very rarely.
Yeah.
And usually you end up taking the high road. So either you split it with them or you back off.
Right.
And but I have been what's called a nominee since 1978. That's when back in the day, you were called nominees or 915s. And so I've had my 915 since 78, 2 years after I became a realtor.
Right.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So obviously when you first got started till now, there's been so many changes to the market, changes to how we do business and everything like that. But I just
I
love
want to know what is the lowest price property you've sold in Vancouver?
I think the lowest I've sold was in Norgate, and I think it was 57,000.
Isn't that amazing?
But there was properties back then going for in the 40s.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me what it would be worth today.
Norgate, a house like that in Norgate would probably be anywhere from 1.3 to 1.5, depending on what kind of updates. Now, keep in mind, when I started selling real estate in North Vancouver and the North Shore, houses that were built in the 50s were only 25, 30 years old. They were new, near new. Those same houses exist now.
Right.
And unfortunately, they're being torn down to build new because there's no land available in North Vancouver in particular.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's always a shame when you see like a livable, like classic
house,
beautiful home
character
kind of get torn down, right? Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes, but sometimes it's nice to, absolutely. You have to breathe life in the stock.
Right.
Unfortunately, though, the marketplace demands a much bigger product than perhaps is necessary because they build to the limit, which could be 45 to 5,000 square feet, and that doesn't suit every neighborhood. But anyway.
So you've seen so many different realtors come through our industry, obviously, with the time that you've been in it. And what do you feel is, because you obviously are, you're educator, you're teaching a lot of these agents as well. They're coming to you for advice and to be consulted throughout their business. What do you find is like the number one attribute that you see for, I guess, successful agents that come to you for tough questions or?
Well, I think the number one attribute is you have to be motivated. You have to want to do this business because there's so much rejection, or there can be so much rejection in this business. If you let it get the better of you, you're not gonna. This is not the business for you. You have to be a self-starter.
Yeah. How do you advise people that are, having a tough time, facing that rejection? What do you normally say to those people?
Is this what you want to do? Quite often, if it's getting or eating somebody up, perhaps this isn't the business for them.
Right.
Like everybody thinks because you can earn a lot of money in real estate, it's a job for everybody. But it takes a lot of discipline. It is not for everybody. The people that I find that seem to be the most successful are the ones that enjoy helping other people. And they're not motivated by the dollars. The dollars come and they are very successful, but they're not so much motivated by the dollars. If you get in this business to be motivated by the money, it will show in the way that you sell. And I think that if you approach this business in the manner that you take it as when I started this business, it was really a second or third profession for people. Nobody came into this business young. In fact, I was the youngest person in the company that I worked for hired, Crest Realty.
Right.
And everybody I sat beside had done something else for 10, 15, 20 years. And real estate was sort of a way of
transition,
going off into the sunset.
Oh, okay.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Going off in the sunset.
When I started in the 70s, people now were starting to see real estate as a career. And by the early 80s, there was a lot of younger people coming into the business. And actually, we sort of congregated together and developed sort of a camaraderie in the industry. We did things like the Grouse Mountain Climb, baseball, and we partied together. And it was a whole different because none of us had kids or were married. It was a community. Absolutely. And that all changed when we got married and had kids. Right. But because most of the people I dealt with in my office were probably somewhere in their mid-30s to up to 60. And the guys at 60 they were old.
I love that.
Yeah. So obviously, with that kind of the start, being surrounded with a lot of those did you learn a lot? Was it really collaborative, or how was it really competitive in environment?
Oh, it was competitive.
Yeah.
But our office was good in that people always took you under their wing. The unfortunate thing is, you started to emulate bad habits because they had bad habits that they were teaching you. Nobody was teaching them, but they had learned them from somebody else, and this is the way that you did it.
Right.
And so often you did develop bad habits. Back then, today the consumer is much better protected than they were
before.
back then.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How so?
Oh, there's so much regulation
Right.
with regard to the agents, what they do. There's a lot of protection for the consumer beforehand, and the consumer is much more informed. Remember, back then we held all the information.
Right.
The reason why somebody called a realtor is because they wanted to know what the house down the street sold for or was listed for. It was hard to get that information, and we had it. So it was necessary for them to come to us. It was difficult for us to get the information unless you worked for a company that had a very good system. And Crest Realty did. We had a lady who was full-time putting books together, new listings completed, listings and sold. And we had them done by price, and we had them done by street.
Wow.
And and it was a resource center, and it was critical that the resource center was up to date because that's what we used when we went to do.
That was your value.
Oh, absolutely. To do a CMA, you would go and you would take the books, and believe me, if somebody went to get a book and the book was out of place or wasn't there, it was reported, and holy hell came down to the sales meeting. Oh yeah,
right.
Because it was a resource to be used by all. But I'll tell you something interesting you might find interesting. When I started this business, appointments were made directly with the seller. When we talk about privacy, back then the seller's name was on the listing,
Right.
the seller's phone number was on the listing, and appointments were made directly with the seller.
Wow.
So as a listing agent, you would phone your seller up and ask if they had any showings. Can you imagine
really?
that?
That's so
sure.
bizarre.
That's so bizarre.
Yeah. When did that shift change? Like what?
Well, that shift started to change when people found that as a great way of tracking expiries, because you knew when the listing expired,
Right.
and you had the seller's number.
Yeah.
Made it pretty easy.
Was it just kind of like a big herd that went to the house?
Oh, sure. The seller's phone never got as busy as the day either 2 or 3 days before it expired or definitely after. And when I say 2 or 3 days before it expired, I'll tell you a little program we had that probably talking about the consumer protections now is the manager at the time sat me down. He said, "Look, if you're going to track listings, what you do is you make sure that you're showing that listing a week or 3 or 4 days before it expires, because that may be the first time that seller's seen an agent, and it'll be you, and he'll remember you because he hasn't seen his agent."
Right.
Right. That's such a smart
Or
idea.
there's a possibility he hasn't
Did
seen
that
his
work?
agent. It did, sure. Oh, yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
I feel like that, and now going to where we're at, right?
Yeah.
Where
everybody's protective of the
protecting
information.
people.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
protecting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, you talk about value proposition back then. What do you think is the value proposition now with having so much information out there to the general public for realtors? Is it?
Well,
What do you think?
Well, it's the service that you provide the client. Back then, it was a CMA really meant getting a number across to the seller. And then you were often in your CMA, you were competing in the number. The guy with the higher number quite often got the listing, just simply because his number sounded better. Today, the value proposition is, what am I going to do for you to get you that number? And so it's changed in that regard.
Right. That's a pretty huge shift.
That's a huge shift. And I think people forget that. And for agents that are listening right now, it really comes down to what service are you really providing your client, right? And that's where it's going. And I think it's where it's been for many, many years, right?
Yes, but don't forget that the other important quality as an agent you have is you have to get people to trust you and like you. Definitely trust you. Hopefully they like you. But that isn't as necessary as the fact that they've got to trust you.
Right.
And so you have to be able to come across as being, have high integrity and honesty.
So how do you instill trust in the clients that you've worked with, or how do you train our agents to do that?
Geez, it's been so long, I forget. You just got to be yourself.
Yeah.
You know, treat people the way you like to be treated.
Right.
Be truthful with them all the time.
Yeah.
Give them the hard news.
Right.
But give it to them because it's accurate. It's. I think the most important thing you can tell anybody is to be who you are. Treat people the way you like to be treated.
I love that.
Yeah, that's huge. I
That's
think
so true.
You know,
though.
you gotta. Yeah, a lot of people think that you can have like this dual personality, but you know how you are at. I feel like how you are at work is how you are at home, is how you are with
Totally.
your friends, and I think having that integrity all the way through is crucial and key to kind of, you know, representing yourself well. You know, I think that's a really big lesson for sure. One of the big when I first started, I used to have my car wasn't washed and I lost a listing that way. Because so I was like, well, if your car isn't clean, how are you taking care of my listing? And I was like, oh my gosh, you're so right. So yeah, that type of thing. Because I think everything shows. So yeah.
Well, you know what's interesting? All four of us sitting here.
Yeah.
For you to be as successful as you are, and you to be as successful as you are, you would never be sitting in a room doing a podcast like this, dressed like we are.
Right.
When I started this business, it was a suit and tie or a jacket and tie.
Right.
Period. You did not.
I feel like that was like 10 years ago too, 10, 15 years ago too. 20.
That started to transition probably in the 80s. Things started
80s.
to lighten up in the 80s. Yeah. Now, some people still wear suit and tie. No question. Other interesting fact, while I think about it, when I started at Crest Realty in North Vancouver, we did not hire women.
I know you told me that. I'm
That
going to tell
is
you
like
guys
unbelievable. That's mind blowing. Why?
I think because we had probably the ownership of Crest Realty at the time. Their integrity was impeccable. They were very trustworthy. What they didn't like, though, and I got to know them quite well. What they didn't like was the emotional experience that can come with a woman when something goes sideways. Like
my God,
they get
that
upset.
is
They couldn't
so
deal with
baloney.
that. They probably, you call it baloney, Michael, but these guys
what they
probably
thought.
had that at home.
Yes.
They didn't need it at the office.
Exactly.
But
They take from their own experiences.
But they did have the West Vancouver office that did hire women. So if you wanted to be a woman and work for Crest Realty, you could work at the West Vancouver office.
Gee.
Now, you mentioned a gentleman earlier, Brian McLean. Well, Brian McLean became one of the owners of Crest Realty in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And one thing he did do is he went to Ed, the owner of the company. He said, we are missing out on the market. He said, what do you mean? And he said, we get women who call in who want to talk to a female realtor because they're comfortable talking to, and we don't have any here. We send them to West Vancouver.
Right.
They don't want to go to West Vancouver. They want a North Vancouver female realtor. Brian instituted hiring women in North Vancouver. Yeah.
Brian. So Brian, maybe he'll listen to this, but Brian was actually like one of my like pseudo mentors at McDonald's, and he would be there so early in the morning. He'd come in with his newspaper, and then he'd leave early to go get a coffee. And he just always, instilled a lot of confidence. He always would say, "Oh, Morgan, like you're at it again." Like just kind of giving me such great positive reinforcement all the time. And that just goes to show that's the type of guy he is for sure. Yeah, he was fantastic.
That's
And he
like
used to be-
shocking to me though, to think that a company wouldn't like work with women or like any kind of like,
Just
you know,
how it was.
yeah.
Well, they hired him just
Right.
in West Van.
Yeah.
But we also,
Yeah.
one other thing that happened on the shore in general, there was a lot of, on title, they put in different, I guess, forms saying that this type of race wasn't allowed to purchase, right?
Oh, those were restrictive covenants.
Restricted covenants,
Yeah.
Really?
right? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Well, keep in mind, a lot of the construction was done in the late 40s, early 50s, and the
Right.
Second World War had just ended.
Mm-hmm.
And so in North Vancouver and the British properties,
Mm-hmm.
they had restrictive covenants. And part of those had an ethnic clause in them.
And they're
that you
still on
couldn't
them.
sell. Yeah, it's
They're still on them.
still there.
They're still
Really?
Well,
lingering.
the
they're trying to.
ethnic part is unconstitutional, but there's still there was the big case in West Vancouver, the restrictive covenant, where the buyer was able to get out of the transaction because British Pacific Properties, who still has the restrictive covenant, had certain conditions of what you could build or what you could do on the property, and this individual felt that it would impede what he wanted to do to that property. So he was able to get out because Clause 9 in the contract says public utilities.
Right.
And that's why we have that addition to the contract now that goes in or should be going into every detached property that is not clear title, that does have restrictive covenants, is any non-financial charges. If you've got a clear title, we see it in every contract. If you have a clear title, like some titles are just clear, there's nothing on them. You don't need that, but
Right.
we see it in every contract as it goes forward, just as a matter of course. That's another thing that's happened in this business. When you wrote contracts out, you were pretty succinct in what you wrote out. Now we see contracts and they got everything in the kitchen sink in there.
Right.
And there's a lot of things in there that don't need to be in there
Yeah.
that are redundant. But
What do you think is redundant on the contracts now, Joe?
Oh, I think, it's the question of whether it should be in there or redundant. I don't think property transfer tax is the place that you disclose what the property transfer
Right.
tax is. That's something that should be disclosed to the buyer when you first meet them, and do it on a second document.
Yeah.
Have them initial it if that's what you require. But putting it in the contract, it would be a shame if that was the first time that a buyer was to see that, because
Right.
when a buyer's sitting down, signing a contract or doing a deal, they're pretty excited about it. There's two things they want to know: how much and when do I get the house?
Right.
Everything else is just probably a blur. So that's not the time to start putting stuff in there that
Right.
you want to disclose to the buyer.
Yeah.
That's important. The other one that kills me is both parties have been advised to seek independent legal advice. You're writing a contract at 7:00 at night and you've got that in there and it's a no subject contract. When is that person supposed to seek independent legal advice?
Right.
Have you afforded them the time? If you think that's important, when you sit down with a buyer
contradictory, right?
or a seller, you should be disclosing that. Look, if there's anything that you want a legal opinion on it, do it before you enter into a contract. Here's a copy of our contract.
Right.
Take it to your lawyer. Yeah, that sort of thing. And same with a listing agreement as well. Empty home tax.
Yeah, there's so many things.
Empty home tax. I mean,
Right.
this
Empty home tax, that was a-
dissertation on empty home tax.
Yes.
It's not required.
Right.
11A speaks to empty home tax,
Right there.
speculation tax. It was put in the contract specifically to deal with
Right.
it. GST is in the contract now. Those things weren't in the contract before.
I think that's so true. There's so many little things on the contracts that are redundant. I think redundant.
Oh, well, people.
Yeah.
But I think what Joe is saying, sorry to interrupt, but I think what Joe is saying is to prepare your client well in advance of
Yeah.
that offer
Well, that should
coming.
be
so that
be just a no-brainer
Right.
for buyers out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you want to make sure that you've ensure that you've disclosed it to them, do it via email or do it on a piece of paper and have them acknowledge it so that you've got it for the file.
Yeah, totally.
You know, but that's where it all should be discussed and disclosed.
Okay, so you've gone through many different, being a managing broker, I'm sure you've seen some complaints in the past. What piece of advice can you give to those agents out there to prepare themselves, to protect themselves, kind of leaning into their business?
Well, one thing that I think that will keep you always out of trouble is if you make sure that you're doing it for the right reason, not for your own benefit, but the benefit of the client.
Right.
Right.
Your benefit will come when the deal goes together, but don't do things because you need the deal to happen.
Yes.
Do things because it's in the best interest of the client. And that's where agents get themselves in trouble.
Right.
Is they do things that are in their best interest or they need them to be in their best interest.
That's so true.
That is so true.
Yeah, if you just keep that in the back of your mind all the time, that's how you get out of real estate jail.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So Joe, obviously being in the Vancouver market, being in the North Vancouver market for so many years, was this last market that we were in, was that the busiest market? Was that the hottest market, or were there hotter markets before?
Oh, there's been lots of hot markets. We've always had prior to the assignment clause coming in the contract, we've always had years where contracts were assigned.
Right.
Contracts could be assigned. I mean, there was nothing illegal about assigning contracts. And all that was required was that the seller was notified that the contract was assigned. We assigned contracts in 1979, 1980, 81. We assigned them in the early 90s. We did it in 2000s. 2016 is when they hit the fan.
Yeah.
Because what happened is, one other point I'll bring up, and maybe I'll put it in perspective, is everybody refers to the marketplace, the fall of 1981 as being the most devastating market. And it was devastating because of percentages. And when you look at what houses sold for in 1979, 80 and 81, the early part of 81, and then they dropped. They corrected 50%.
50%.
It was
Oh my
big.
God.
But they went up 100%.
Oh,
They
wow.
went up 100%, and then they corrected. So, for example, you had a house that sold for $100,000 in '78, and then by 1981, in the first couple of months, it was $200,000. Well, that house then corrected back to $100,000 or $110,000. A perfect example I had was
In a short period, in like a year period?
Oh yeah, well,
Oh, my.
well, there was a lot of
People
things in
losing
play.
their yeah.
There was lots of things in play. Now, I was going to make a point there. We're talking about
Assignments?
no assignments. 2006. Oh, the busiest market.
Right.
That 2016 was busy. This, yes, was an extremely busy market.
Right.
But we've had markets where there's been $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 drops in prices in West Vancouver, parts of North Vancouver,
Right.
Which is quite devastating in terms of dollar value compared to 1981. But 81 is always referred to as that market, and percentage-wise, it was. Dollar-wise, 2016. If you were in West Vancouver in the beginning of the run-up of 2016, the end of 2015,
Right.
there was substantial money made. And then in 2017 and 18, there was substantial money lost if you tried to sell in that same period. I mean, builders bought lots at the end of or during 2016 and tried to build themselves out. Well, if they were coming on the market in 18 or 19,
Right.
it was
Nothing.
It was devastating.
Yeah, it was devastating.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously the high interest rate was a big thing.
Oh,
back
in
then.
81.
80s.
You had inflation, you had the high interest rate, you had a ton of inventory on the market. We had what we called mom and pop buyers. We had people that from the 50s and 60s had clear titled their house. They heard in the news that people were making up to $500, $1,000 a week in real estate. They would mortgage their house. They would buy a house with the idea of selling it, not hanging on to it, and they'd get caught.
They get
At
caught.
the end, they would lose the house that they bought, and now they'd have a mortgage on their house.
I know
Oh,
a couple
geez.
people that happened to.
Yeah.
On the shore, especially, they were like, is there much of a difference? Like, obviously, you've sold in many different places. What is the difference between West and North Vancouver for people that are in real estate that are jumping? Like, what is the difference in real estate between those two different markets?
The difference between West Vancouver agents and North Vancouver agents is when things are tough, West Vancouver agents are working in North Vancouver. Agents in West Vancouver always dabble in North Vancouver. Okay. Always. It's much easier for an agent in West Vancouver with a West Vancouver company to dabble in North Van. A little harder for North Van to dabble in West Van. Agents do it, but it's a little bit harder because people in West Vancouver like to have that address. So my real estate company is so and so, whatever. But the hardest thing is the names are bigger in West Vancouver. They seem to command sort of a bigger control of the market by fewer people. North Vancouver, there seems to be a broader base. There's some very good agents in North Vancouver that do a lot of business, but there's a lot of agents in North Vancouver that do good business. West Vancouver gets dominated by a few names. You could probably name 6 or 7 right off the top. Yeah, that do dominate the market. And that's, I'm not exactly sure whether that's a word of mouth thing or a prestige thing, or we're sitting at a cocktail party, Michael, and I say, well, my agent is so and so. I might have met him once, but I'm telling you who he is. That might play more in West Vancouver. I could be dead wrong on that, but you might know.
Difference in real estate in general, though. Is there much of a difference other than like dollar value as of now in regards to
feels like it's kind of
becoming
it's like East Van and North and West Vancouver, West Side and East Side Vancouver.
No, there's still a differential between North and West Vancouver. Yeah, West Vancouver is probably towards 2.5 to 3 for average price or HPI. I haven't checked it recently, and North Vancouver would be 1.9. No, 1.8. Approaching that 1.9, 1.8. Yeah.
You know why? It's because they have the longer ocean front, right? It's all the ocean views.
The difference between the North and West Vancouver market is you hit it on the head. There's no commercial on the West Vancouver waterfront. North Vancouver waterfront is commercial from one end to the other, with the exception of Deep Cove. But all the inner harbor is commercial, industrial. So that's a big impact. I've often thought what it would be like if that was just beach all along there. Right. Yeah, but that's a big part of it.
It's a big part of it. Yeah. There's something about that ocean front still.
Because the when I started the business, the gap between the two wasn't significant. There was a gap, but it wasn't significant. And the gap has changed dramatically.
Yeah, it's a lot like West and East Vancouver.
And they started building much bigger houses in West Vancouver.
Right. Larger lots, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So 1,500 square feet higher.
Yeah. Started with the properties, and then it started to move as you started to move west up on the mountain with British Pacific properties and land becoming available. They were building.
Now you're starting to see it get clear cut all the way up, which is really interesting to see it go up even further in the BPs, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Still magical place for sure.
I think off the top we forgot to make an announcement.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Well, we're building a North Vancouver office. I don't know, for those of you guys that don't know.
We should have said this
at the start, but that's okay. So we should have introduced this to all of us, and that's a big reason why Joe's here.
Joe.
And it's because
Joe's
of Joe
making us do it.
No. We're building a office in North Vancouver. That's it's going to eventually be about 3,000 square feet for us to plant in Edgemont Village, and Joe will be one of the leaders there at that North Vancouver location, and we're really excited about that. So we're just in the process of renovating it right now, which is really exciting and fun. Joe, you've been by, right?
Oh God, many times. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No.
What do you think of our location, Joe?
Excellent.
Yeah.
Edgemont Village is great. I've always thought that that was a place for an office, a real estate office. Years ago, they did have one.
Right.
Well, they've had one in there for years, but years ago there was Ole Overgaard used to have an office in there, a little small office. Never did much business, but had
that changes now.
But remember though, Back then, Edgemont Village was 4 gas stations, 2 supermarkets, and really was nothing. Edgemont Village was a step up for you guys in the business who have been in the business a long time.
Right.
Edgemont Village was a step up from Norgate. Edgemont Village were bungalows with basements. Norgate were ranchers. They didn't have basements. So quite often you moved up to Edgemont Village, not because of walkability or anything like that. It was because you got a little bigger house. As you went up the hill, the houses got bigger and were more expensive. That transition started to change when they revitalized Edgemont in the late 80s, early 90s. To give you a perfect example, Canyon Heights always outsold Forest Hills. Forest Hills is closer to Edgemont Village. I noticed the transition probably in the late 90s. I had a house up on, first house I ever sold, 1028 Canyon. I sold it in 1990, resold it in 1999. And when I was doing comparables, I was looking at the houses in Forest Hills, and they were selling for more. And it wasn't because of the house, it was because the land. The builders wanted the land because Edgemont now was a meeting place. It was a community-oriented place. And so people wanted to be closer so that they could, on the weekend, they could park their cars and walk. And so as you went up the hill, unless you had a good view, you were not getting the same kind of value for your land.
Right.
So those houses up there, instead of being more expensive than Forest Hills, started to become less expensive than Forest Hills. And it was all about the land. Because there is no land up there.
Because there's no land.
Yeah.
Exactly. But there's bears, guys. There's bears.
Big scary bears.
I actually, my husband and I are just looking around right now, and I was like, I don't know if I can deal with the bear. It's like I don't know if I can deal with those bears, babe. And that's like a real like con on my list is a black bear in my backyard.
Do you have a deep-seated bear fear?
I'm just, actually, my husband has been like 15 feet away from a black bear. When we used to live in Horseshoe Bay, we lived in a duplex when we first got together. And the black bear came up and he was just putting the garbage out. And the black bear came up, and I screamed, this is before kids, there's a black bear. And he ran, which he shouldn't have. He probably should have just like slowly walked away or stopped.
Don't you make yourself really big?
Yeah,
when
so
you see
he
a
should
bear?
have stopped, but he ran.
Yeah.
And
Black
ever
bear.
since then, I have a fear of black bears.
You make yourself big if you have control of your wits. But I was showing a house at the very top of Mountain Highway, and and the guy next door was smoking salmon. I came out the deck, and I had the people right behind me.
Oh my gosh.
I walked around the deck, and then I started to go down the stairs to the back of the property. And coming down the sidewalk was a bear. So I turned around and I said, there's a bear coming up here. And the bear saw me and ran. And I saw the bear and ran. So it was a mutual.
That's right. No
Like I
confrontation.
just turned around and was like, there's a bear coming. I've got to get away from this. Oh my God. Well, we're so excited to start our Oakwyn, North Vancouver office with Joe. You have such a wealth of knowledge in our industry, and we're so lucky to have you here at Oakwyn.
Yeah, we're really thankful to have Joe, and thank you for being part of the podcast, Joe. The time's just flown right by. So thank you guys so much. Joe, any kind of, let's say, anything that you're excited about for the future? Obviously the office, but yeah.
The office for one, because I think the day of the independent broker is coming back. It lost ground to the franchise years ago, but I think that people recognize the value in the independent broker. Having the ownership in the community you work is very important. If you notice, the brokerages gravitated to West Vancouver location. Used to be a fairly good balance between brokerages in North and West Vancouver, but at one point there was only 3 brokerages in North Vancouver of any consequence because everybody had gravitated toward West Vancouver. I'm not sure what that was about. Perhaps they knew that they could sell real estate from West Vancouver with a West Vancouver address in North Vancouver much easier than the reverse. But the only ones that were in North Vancouver at that time were the franchises, but I think there's room for the independents, and they are going to get stronger as time goes by.
Here we come.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. And the goal of Oakwyn North Shore should be to get to the top there.
Dominate it.
Yeah.
And
We're coming for you guys.
And it's not going to be hard. We've got good people. We've got a good base. We're well over 50 people there now, and I think we can grow.
Yeah, and the right kind of people too.
That's
like
right.
just as Joe said, just to circle back, they're all motivated by helping others. They're really wanting to serve the community very well. They're so collaborative. We had such a fun group. Like we just did our golf tournament. I saw Joe there and a bunch of the North Van agents there as well. Having a few drinks together. It was a lot of fun, and enjoying each other's company. And we do have a great group, and that's a lot to do with Joe's leadership. And thank you, Joe. And thank you for being part of the podcast.
Yes, thank you, Joe.
Yeah, Joe.
You're the best.
My first podcast.
Joe's first podcast. And
If you'd like to go,
as a
like,
game,
come on, this week. And
I'll
like,
close.
what?
I'll close. I have a little bit more practice.
Look at this.
Yeah. So thank you
Look
guys.
at this guy in the polo shirt.
Thank you, Joe, for being a part of the Oakwyn podcast today. And thank you for listening to the Oakwyn podcast.
Mm-hmm.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please rate it 5 out of 5 on the podcast platform you're listening to it on, and write us a little review, a little rating. We love a little boost in the ego.
Yes.
And Joe, what's the best way of agents to get in touch with you as well?
Call me.
Yeah.
Call him.
What's the number, Joe?
604-329-0102.
Great.
Call
Easy.
me as opposed to text me or email me. I'm old school.
Joe is old school. And if you enjoy this podcast as well and you're interested in Oakwyn, call Joe or go to our website at oakwyn.com/join and type in the message box pod 2021 and you will receive a free piece of
Mystery swag. Thanks,
Okay, guys. Thanks, Joe.
Take
See you
care.
guys soon.
Okay.